In a village haunted by ancient legends, Sophia mysteriously disappears, leaving only enigmatic clues in an abandoned castle. She is involved in something far beyond imagination. As secrets of dark magic and forbidden rituals emerge, the evil lurking in the depths must be confronted. What will happen in this final chapter of Sophia's story? It was late afternoon, and the shadows of the trees stretched along the riverbank as Agnes, a woman with a face marked by time and hard work, washed clothes in the flowing water. The sound of the rushing stream was almost soothing, blending with the steady rhythm of her hands dipping and scrubbing the fabrics. The sun was setting, and she knew she would soon need to gather her things and head home. Suddenly, the gentle sound of the water was interrupted by something. Footsteps. Agnes lifted her head, her eyes alert, and saw a figure slowly approaching. The air around seemed to grow colder as the person walked toward her, and something inside her made her stop working, feeling a slight shiver run down her spine. The figure stopped a few meters away from her, at the edge of the river. It was a woman, but her appearance was strangely indistinct. Her hair fell messily over her shoulders. But what caught Agnes's attention was the absolute silence. The woman said nothing, just stood there watching. "Who's there?" Agnes asked, her voice wavering. She stood up, her hands still wet and her feet rooted to the ground. "Do you need help?" But the stranger didn't respond. Her cold, fixed eyes stared at Agnes in a way that made her feel uncomfortable, as though she was being observed not just by a person, but by something deeper, something unsettling. The silence between them stretched, and the night began to fall, bringing with it a sense of impending danger. Agnes took a step back, her heart racing. "Who are you?" she insisted, her voice now firmer, trying to push away the growing fear. Even so, the stranger remained motionless, as if trapped in another time, another place, looking at Agnes with no intention of moving or answering. The wind blew, and a strange sensation washed over Agnes. She knew she should leave, but she couldn't stop staring at the mysterious woman. And then, in a subtle movement, the stranger tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something distant, and took a step forward, slowly. Agnes, focused on the laundry, hadn't noticed the stranger's silent approach. When she finally lifted her eyes, the woman was already close, so close that Agnes gave a small start of surprise. Her heart raced, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to stop. The sound of the water, the rustling of the leaves, even the wind seemed to have ceased. She blinked quickly, trying to understand how someone had gotten so close without her noticing. Who are you?" she asked, this time with a mix of surprise and apprehension. The woman remained silent, her pale face illuminated by the last rays of the setting sun. Her eyes were fixed, almost empty, and her presence carried a strange feeling, something that made Agnes shiver. The woman's skin seemed to reflect the light in an unusual way, as if she herself were out of place, something displaced in time and space. Agnes took another step back, her breathing now heavy, the wet clothes still hanging from her trembling hands. The feeling of danger grew, but her curiosity fought against her fear. "Are you okay?" she dared to ask, her voice softer, as if trying to calm not only the woman, but also herself. The stranger, however, didn't react. She didn't blink, didn't move her lips, just watched her with a gaze that seemed to pierce the space between them. A gaze that made Agnes feel small, vulnerable. Agnes looked around, hoping to see someone else, some explanation for this sudden appearance. But they were alone by the riverbank, the daylight quickly fading. The water continued to flow beside them, but now it seemed like a distant sound, almost insignificant compared to the woman's presence. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, and Agnes felt the wet fabric in her hands tighten against her trembling fingers. The woman didn't move, but something in the air shifted, as if the night carried a secret with it, one that Agnes wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. "Please say something," Agnes whispered, anxiety mingling with fear. "Who are you?" The sense of danger that Agnes felt turned into panic when the strange woman moved even closer, her eyes fixed on hers, hypnotizing her in a frightening way. No matter how much she wanted to, Agnes couldn't move. Her feet seemed rooted to the ground, as if an invisible force had taken hold of her body. She tried to scream, but her voice failed, leaving only a terrible silence between the two of them. The woman, without breaking eye contact, reached out and grabbed Agnes's arm with a cold, firm grip. The icy touch made her shudder, but she couldn't react. Her mind screamed for her to run, but her body wouldn't obey. As if under some kind of spell, she was pulled away from the riverbank into the darkness of the forest. The trees around them seemed to close in, as if nature itself was conspiring with the mystery surrounding the stranger. The dry leaves under their feet crunched, but the sound felt distant, muffled by the growing sense of fear that filled Agnes's chest. Each step led her further away from the world she knew, into something she did not understand. The woman did not speak. She only guided her with increasing force, her fingers digging into Agnes's skin, who began to feel the pressure building. But still, she was unable to resist. It was as if all of her willpower had been drained from her body. Suddenly, the woman stopped. They were surrounded by trees, far from any trace of civilization. The silence of the forest was oppressive. Agnes, still unable to move or scream, looked at the stranger with wide eyes, her heart pounding so hard she could almost hear it. Then something changed. The woman's face, which had seemed human, though pale, took on a predatory expression. Her lips parted, revealing long, sharp teeth gleaming in the faint light filtering through the trees. Agnes's heart nearly stopped as she realized what was standing before her. Before she could even comprehend what was happening, the woman lunged at her with supernatural speed. Her sharp teeth sank into Agnes's neck, and the pain was immediate and intense, radiating through her entire body. A scream of horror echoed in her mind, but it never left her mouth. Darkness began to close in on her vision as the blood drained from her veins. Her body weakened rapidly, her legs gave way, and the world around her started to dissolve. With the last thread of consciousness, Agnes collapsed, fainting in the arms of the creature that had stolen not only her blood, but something much deeper. The forest swallowed her, and silence reclaimed the area. The vampire, after leaving Agnes's unconscious body on the forest floor, vanished swiftly among the trees. Her movements were quick and silent, as if she floated across the uneven ground. The night had grown darker, and the shadows of the trees stretched in every direction, creating an almost surreal scene. She moved deeper into the forest until she finally stopped. Before her stood a man with a dark appearance. His face was partially hidden by the shadows, but his eyes gleamed with an enigmatic light. He was tall, and his presence exuded an aura of power and mystery. There was something about him that seemed to command the very environment around him, as if the night itself respected him. The vampire, who had maintained a predatory silence until now, looked at the man with a mixture of respect and devotion. She stood before him, quiet, as if awaiting his words. "Sophia," he finally said, his voice low and firm, breaking the silence that ruled the forest. "You are evolving well." A slight smile curled his lips, a smile that brought no warmth, but something dark and full of hidden intentions. "Soon," he continued, his eyes watching her closely, "you will be fully transformed." Sophia, the young girl who had disappeared from the village, inclined her head in a slight nod, acknowledging the man's words. Her face, once pale and innocent, now seemed consumed by absolute coldness, her eyes devoid of any trace of humanity. The man took a step forward, evaluating her as if she were his creation, something molded by his hands. "You don't feel what you once did, do you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophia slowly shook her head. "No," she replied, her voice soft, almost emotionless. "Everything I was feels distant, like a forgotten dream." "That is how it should be," the man said, satisfied. "The memories of who you were will soon vanish completely, and when that happens, you will be one of us, in body and soul." The wind blew gently through the trees, and the forest, once vibrant and full of life, now felt like a place forgotten by time, just as Sophia had been forgotten by her own humanity. She remained silent, gazing at the man, while he continued to observe her with that deep, calculating look. "You will be powerful, Sophia," he said, with an intensity she absorbed without question. But there is still more to come. And with those words, the night swallowed them once again. Annalisa sat at the kitchen table, her restless hands intertwined over the worn fabric. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows on her tired face. Hans and Victor sat across from her, their expressions serious yet skeptical. They had known her for years and understood the suffering that Sophia's loss had caused. It was hard for either of them to believe that Sophia could have reappeared, especially in the way Annalise described. Hans, a sturdy man of few words, kept his eyes fixed on the floor, absorbing what she had just said. Victor, thinner and always analytical, leaned slightly forward, looking her in the eyes. "Annalise," Victor began cautiously, "you said you saw her near your house, but is it possible that after all the trauma, you just imagined it?" He hesitated to continue, but the concern in his voice was clear. Sometimes suffering can play tricks on the mind. Sophia disappeared weeks ago. It could have been a memory, or the longing to see her that made you think she was there. Annalise, who had been silent until then, lifted her gaze firmly. Her heart was heavy, but her determination was unwavering. "I know what I saw, Victor," she said, her voice strong but tinged with pain. "It wasn't imagination. It was my daughter, Sophia. I know her. I would recognize my own daughter anywhere, under any circumstances." She took a deep breath, as if trying to explain it would relive that disturbing moment. "She looked different, yes, with a pallor I had never seen, but it was her. I called out to her, and she looked directly at me. She just didn't seem the same anymore." Hans finally raised his eyes, his brows furrowed in concern. "And what did she do?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. Annalisa shook her head, frustrated. "She just stood there, a few meters away from me, as if she had no emotion, as if she felt nothing for me anymore. And then she simply left, vanished into the night. She didn't say a word." The silence that followed was thick. Hans and Victor exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Hans shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Victor maintained his thoughtful expression, now tinged with unease. "If it was really Sophia," Hans said slowly, "why wouldn't she have spoken to you? If she were alive, why wouldn't she come home?" Annalise took a deep breath, feeling tears threatening to spill again. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice faltering slightly. "I just know it was her. Something terrible happened. I feel it. Sophia's not the same. But I saw her, and I need to find out what happened to my daughter." Victor, although still skeptical, could not ignore the conviction in Annalise's words. He sighed, stroking his chin. "So what do you want us to do, Annalise?" he asked calmly. Annalisa looked at both of them, her expression resolute. "I need you to help me find Sophia. Something is wrong, and I won't rest until I understand what happened to her." Hans and Victor left Annalisa's house in silence, the cold night air wrapping around them as they walked through the dark streets of the village. Annalisa's words echoed in both their minds, and the sense of mystery surrounding Sophia's disappearance felt heavier than ever. Hans broke the silence as they walked. "We conducted a thorough search of the castle and the surrounding areas," he said, still processing the conversation. "We scoured every corner, every corridor, and found no sign of Sophia. It's as if she vanished without a trace, or as if someone took her." Victor, always more measured, simply nodded. "I'm not sure I believe Annalise really saw Sophia," he said in a tone reflecting on the inexplicable. "But the fact that she is so certain, that makes the situation even stranger. If it was Sophia, where has she been all this time? And if it wasn't, what did Annalisa see?" As they walked along the cobblestone streets, the silhouette of the tavern appeared ahead, its windows glowing with the warm light of candles. The sound of voices and laughter could be heard from inside, a stark contrast to the air of worry they both carried. Upon entering, they were greeted with nods and curious looks, but neither was in the mood to openly discuss what had happened. They ordered drinks and sat in a corner, watching the activity around them. The tavern, as always, was the heart of the village conversations. Farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen gathered there to share stories and often rumors. It was then that Hans and Victor began to hear whispers around them. I heard someone saw a figure in the woods, one of the men at the bar murmured to his companion, unaware that Victor and Hans were listening. They say it was large and moved quickly. No one could really see what it was, but this figure has been appearing for a few nights now. Figure? Hans asked, leaning in a little closer to hear better. The man at the bar noticed him, and recognizing Hans, nodded in greeting. Yes, he replied, now speaking directly to the two of them. Some hunters who were patrolling the forest at night said they saw a strange shape. It was like a shadow, but it moved too fast. They couldn't keep up. Victor exchanged a significant glance with Hans. Where was it seen? He asked, trying not to sound alarmed. At the edges of the forest, the man replied. Near the old castle, of course. Always there, isn't it? There's something about that place that doesn't let anyone rest. Hans furrowed his brow, feeling a weight growing in his chest. And what else was said? He pressed. The man shook his head. Nothing concrete, just rumors. No one wants to go there at night, not even the bravest. And if there's something wandering around, well, whatever it is, no one wants to get close enough to find out. Victor took a sip of his drink, deep in thought. Do you think this has anything to do with Sophia? He asked Hans, his voice low. Hans didn't respond immediately, but the worried look on his face revealed what he was beginning to fear. The next day, Victor set out early, determined to find any clue that could shed light on Sophia's disappearance. The village was still waking up as he walked toward the forest, the morning mist enveloping the trees and casting a gloomy shadow over the landscape. He knew that previous searches had revealed nothing, but something inside him urged him to try again. Perhaps with more attention to detail, he could find something that had gone unnoticed. Upon reaching the vicinity of the castle, Victor paused for a moment, observing the imposing structure of dark stones rising before him. The silence around was almost absolute, broken only by the distant sound of leaves rustling in the wind. He began his search on the outside, walking around the building, looking at the ground for any signs of disturbance or footprints. However, after hours of investigation, he found nothing that could provide answers. No marks, no traces. Frustrated, Victor decided to explore the interior of the castle once more. He entered through the main door, which stood ajar, as if waiting for him. Inside, the soft light filtering through the cracks barely illuminated the vast empty halls. Victor focused his attention on every detail, exploring corridor after corridor, room after room. When he reached the library, he felt an involuntary shiver. With a keen eye, Victor began to examine the shelves and tables in the library. Ancient books, bound in leather and covered in dust, lined the shelves. He ran his fingers over the worn covers, searching for something that caught his attention. It was then that he noticed in a dimly lit corner a pile of old parchments and faded maps. Curious, Victor picked up the papers and began to examine them. They were detailed blueprints of the castle. He spread them out on a table and realized they were far more complex than he had imagined. There were underground passages, tunnels, and hidden rooms that had not been explored during the searches. Some parts of the castle were inaccessible according to the diagrams. With his heart racing, Victor gathered all the parchments and carefully stored them in his bag. If there was something more in the castle, something that could explain Sophia's disappearance, the blueprints might provide him with a new direction. Back in the village, Victor spent the afternoon and evening studying the blueprints in detail. By the flickering candlelight, he traced with his finger the paths leading to secret corridors, to passages that connected to the castle's foundations. This was more than just an abandoned structure. It seemed designed to hide something, or perhaps to protect whoever was inside. The unease in his chest grew as he analyzed each drawing. There was something in the castle that he had not yet found, something that might be directly linked to the mystery surrounding Sophia. Victor was in the small room, the flickering candlelight reflecting off the papers scattered across the table. He was still absorbed in his own thoughts about the castle's blueprints, the hidden tunnels, and what they might mean for Sophia's disappearance. He had discussed his findings with Hans a few hours earlier, but now in the silence of the night, everything felt darker, more mysterious. Something about the castle didn't make sense, something he couldn't explain, and that left him restless. It was then that he heard a knock at the door. The sound echoed through the small room, causing Victor to turn abruptly toward the entrance. Who could it be at this hour? He thought for a moment it might be Hans, with some new information or an idea to move the investigation forward. Rising from the chair, he walked to the door, the wooden floor creaking beneath his feet. "Who's there?" he asked hesitantly as he grasped the doorknob. There was no immediate response, only the silence of the night outside. His heart began to race, a bad feeling washing over him. Determined, Victor opened the door. Before him stood a shadowy figure. His eyes were deep, almost empty, and a cold smile formed on his thin lips. The man had a disturbing presence, as if the air around him were heavier, colder. Victor instinctively took a step back. "Who are you? What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but there was a slight tremor in his words. Something was deeply wrong. The man stepped forward slowly, and his voice sounded low and icy. "I've come to take back what is mine, what you took from the castle." Victor's blood ran cold. He had told no one except Hans about the documents he had brought. How did this stranger know? He tried to remain calm, but fear was now clearly visible in his eyes. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" he insisted, his voice wavering slightly. The man did not answer immediately. He took another step forward, his eyes fixed on Victor's. And then, without warning, he struck. In a quick and brutal movement, the man grabbed Victor by the neck with a strength that belied his slender appearance. Victor struggled, trying to pry the man's hands from his neck. But it was as if he were trapped in a nightmare. He could barely breathe, and terror consumed him. The mysterious man then brought his face close to Victor's, and with a whisper that seemed to echo through the room, said, "You shouldn't have tampered with what wasn't yours." In a sudden and lethal motion, the man twisted Victor's neck, and he fell to the ground with a muffled sound, his life slipping away in an instant. Victor's body lay still, the silence of the night once again enveloping the scene. The shadowy man looked at the fallen body on the ground with no apparent emotion. The next day, the news of Victor's death spread quickly through the village. Hans received the information with a chill down his spine. He had been with Victor the night before, discussing the documents Victor had found in the castle. Now his friend was dead, in a brutal and mysterious manner. No one knew who could have done it or why, but Hans had a dark suspicion. Arriving at Victor's house, Hans felt the weight of silence in the air. The place was messy, but not in a typical way. Something had happened there, something terrible. He searched the small table where Victor had left the documents about the castle's secret passages, but there was no sign of any of the papers. They had vanished. Hans frowned, thinking about the conversations he had had with Victor. Although the documents were no longer there, he knew Victor had made an important discovery, the existence of a secret crypt. Victor believed something sinister was hidden in that castle, something related to the ancient legends that had haunted the village for over a century. There were stories of people found lifeless, with mysterious punctures on their necks, and Victor believed those deaths were linked to some entity or being hidden deep within the castle. Hans recalled their last conversation when Victor mentioned his suspicion about the crypt. According to the maps they had examined, the entrance to this crypt was hidden in an underground passage, a place no one had accessed for years. It was there that Victor believed evil was rooted, perhaps the cause of all the tragedies that had occurred in the area. Now more suspicious and anxious, Hans left Victor's house, feeling the need to act quickly. He knew that if those documents had been stolen, someone or something did not want the truth to be uncovered. And if Victor was right, what lurked in the castle was not just an ancient legend, but something real and deadly. Walking through the village streets, Hans thought of the stories told by past generations, the missing people, the bodies found in the forest, and the signs of punctures on the necks that no one could explain. The legend of the castle had become part of the daily life of the villagers, but now it seemed there was more truth in it than anyone had imagined. Hans knew he needed to return to the castle and find the entrance to the crypt before it was too late. He prepared carefully that morning, gathering the few things he deemed essential for what he was about to do. He had studied in depth the stories and maps of the castle that Victor had left behind. From what he discovered, there was a real chance that the threat was something far beyond the ordinary, a vampire. He knew that creatures like this, if they were real, could only be confronted while they slept during the day. And the secret crypt that Victor had identified was likely where this being hid. Hans, in talking with the elders of the village, heard accounts that brought to light dark secrets about the castle. Some mentioned that, before the place was abandoned, one of the members of the old family practiced black magic. He was obsessed with power and longevity, seeking ways to manipulate hidden forces. They said that strange rituals took place in the castle at night, and after the sudden departure of the family, the structure was never the same. The villagers claimed that the castle bore the mark of something evil, and those who ventured there rarely returned the same. Intrigued by these stories, Hans began to connect the dots. The practice of black magic could explain the mystery surrounding the disappearances and the sinister aura enveloping the castle. He wondered if the rituals performed there had left more than just tales. Perhaps what the villagers feared was a consequence of those rituals, a force that still inhabited the place. Determined to understand what was really happening, Hans decided to return to the castle, believing that the key to solving the mystery lay in the secrets hidden by the old family and their forbidden rituals. The morning was cold and overcast, the air heavy and silent as Hans left the village heading toward the castle. He walked with firm steps, his face hardened by determination, but fear throbbed in his mind. He had never imagined that ancient legends could be real, but now, in light of Victor's death and the mysteries surrounding Sophia's disappearance, he could no longer ignore the truth. Upon arriving at the castle, the imposing structure appeared even more sinister under the pale light of day. Hans recalled the maps he had studied with Victor. The secret passage leading to the crypt, according to the map, was hidden in one of the rooms on the second floor. He entered the castle cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The place felt deserted, but Hans knew that danger lurked, hidden in the shadows. Ascending the spiral staircase to the upper floor, he made his way to the room that, according to the drawings, should hide the entrance to the passage. It was a simple chamber with old furniture covered in dust, but the stone floor seemed different in one area. Hans knelt down, forcefully pushing a loose stone slab that moved slowly, revealing a staircase descending into a dark tunnel. With a lantern in hand and his heart racing, Hans descended the stairs. The air was damp and heavy as he advanced through the underground corridor. In the distance, he could see the entrance to the crypt. The door was old, made of thick, worn wood, covered in moss. Hans knew that behind that door might lie the vampire, asleep, waiting for nightfall to emerge again. Taking a deep breath, he carefully pushed the door open, feeling the cold of the crypt's interior wrap around his body. The space was covered in dust and darkness, but in the center stood a large stone coffin. Hans approached slowly, the sound of his heart beating in his ears. He knew this was the decisive moment. He took out a wooden stake that he had brought, gripping it tightly in his hand. He moved closer to the coffin, ready to face whatever was inside. Hans hesitated for a moment before the coffin. The cold and darkness of the crypt enveloped him, but something caught his attention. A small wooden door in one of the walls of the crypt. He hadn't noticed it before. With his heart racing, he decided to check what was behind that door. Slowly opening it, he was led into a smaller, darker room. In the center of the space, another stone coffin rested, his gaze immediately fixed on the heavy lid of the coffin. Hans approached and, with a heavy sigh, pushed the lid open. Inside, he saw the pale, motionless face of Sophia. She lay there, almost as if she were just sleeping. Her expression was cold, her skin paler than he had ever seen. In that moment, he knew that Sophia had been transformed. The stories he and Victor had discussed confirmed it. To save Sophie, he needed to destroy the vampire that had condemned her to this existence. Time was short. He returned to the main hall of the crypt, his footsteps echoing against the stone walls. Hans knew what he needed to do. According to his studies, if he destroyed the vampire that had transformed Sophia, she could be freed from this curse. The only way to undo the transformation was to act quickly before the creature awoke. Hans approached the large stone coffin again, stake firmly in his hand, sweat dripping down his forehead. With all his strength, he pushed the lid of the coffin, revealing the vampire within, a terrifying figure, gray skin and eyes closed in deep slumber. The vampire lay motionless, but Hans knew that if he waited until nightfall, it would be too late. With the stake in one hand and the hammer in the other, Hans raised his arms, aiming for the heart of the sleeping creature. The weight of responsibility and fear was overwhelming, but he knew there was no other way. Hans plunged the stake with all his strength, feeling the firm impact against the vampire's chest. The sound was terrible. A piercing, horrific scream echoed through the crypt, reverberating off the stone walls. The creature writhed violently inside the coffin, its stiff limbs thrashing against the edges as a guttural noise escaped from its throat. Hans stepped back, his heart racing, watching the horrifying agony of the vampire as it twisted in its final death throes. For a few interminable seconds, the creature moved in a frantic frenzy, its red eyes opening for a moment to lock onto Hans, with a hatred that seemed to pierce his soul. But gradually, the movement ceased. The vampire, which moments ago had seemed invincible, lay still, its body slowly disintegrating into dust before Hans's eyes. The silence that followed was so profound that he could hear his own heavy breathing echoing in the empty space. Still panting, Hans stepped away from the coffin, keeping his eyes fixed on the scene before him. The vampire was destroyed. However, he knew his mission was not yet complete. Sophia, he needed to check if she was safe. With his heart racing, Hans quickly returned to the room where Sophia lay. Upon opening the door, he found the coffin where she had been resting. Approaching carefully, he saw that the transformation seemed to be beginning to reverse. The extreme pallor of her skin was slowly fading, and her face no longer appeared cold and motionless as before. She still lay there, eyes closed, but her chest was now rising and falling gently, as if she were breathing again. Hans knelt beside her, feeling a wave of relief wash over his body. He had fulfilled his mission.